My name is Franklin Ellison. I'm a retiree from the rail depot in Clayton, Alabama. It's been many years since I stopped hearing the train whistles announcing arrivals and departures. But some things you never forget, especially when they mark your soul like a branding iron. What I'm going to tell you today is something I kept locked in my chest for a long time. A story that might just help someone going through the same thing I did. I live alone in a simple corner house where I raise my chickens and tend my garden in the backyard. My little grandson, James, a mischievous boy with straight hair that seems to catch fire when the sun hits it, usually spends a few days with me when his mother has to travel for work. Those moments with him are what I look forward to most all week. It was during one of those visits that everything started to change. My wife, Eleanor, and I lived a very quiet routine, the kind where you don't even notice time passing. After years working on the railroad, checking schedules, and inspecting tracks, I was used to a life arranged by the clock. I would wake up early, before the sun even showed itself. I'd brew a strong cup of coffee on the wood-burning stove, just how my Ellie liked it, and then take my grandson to school when he was staying here. We lived on that train of life without much fuss, you know. The days were like those straight-line journeys where the landscape changes slowly outside the window. Ellie was a quiet woman, one of those who say little but express so much in their eyes. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and notice her side of the bed was empty. "Just went to get some water, old man. Go back to sleep," she'd say. And I, trusting her like I always did, would close my eyes and drift back to my dreams. Until one day, my grandson James, with that innocence only children possess, left me with a chilling thorn in my side. We were sitting under the pecan tree in the yard after a Sunday soul food dinner. Fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens. The kind of meal nobody down here can resist. The boy was playing with some wooden cars I made for him when he suddenly looked up and said, "Grandpa, why does Grandma talk to a man at the window every single morning? He calls her my flower." My heart stumbled so hard I thought I was going to fall right off the bench. I tried to play it cool. I managed an awkward smile and told him it must have been a child's dream. But James insisted. "It's true, Grandpa, I saw her. When I wake up to go potty, I see Grandma at the kitchen window talking to someone outside, and she goes shh when she sees me." That stuck in my head, hammering away like a spike driver hitting the rail ties. For the rest of the day, I stayed quiet, chewing on those words like someone trying to swallow food they couldn't quite manage. If you're enjoying my story, please give it a like to cheer up this old heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my upcoming life stories, and tell me in the comments where you are watching this video from and what time it is there right now. It makes me happy to know from which corner of the world and at what time of day people are listening to me. I was born and raised right here in Clayton, in this corner of Alabama, where the foothills meet the sky. I grew up running through the open fields, smelling the scent of the collard greens when harvest season came, and listening to ghost stories my daddy used to tell on full moon nights. It was a simple childhood, but rich in experiences, the kind you only appreciate when your hair has turned white. My father worked as a local hauler, carrying goods from one place to another before the main rail lines came through. I remember him coming home smelling of dust and rain, always bringing some surprise in his bags. A different kind of sweet potato pie, a fruit we didn't have around here, sometimes even a simple toy that made my eyes sparkle brighter than the stars. Our house was small, with a dirt floor. But my mama kept everything spotless, like a mirror. She spent the entire day making biscuits, homemade jams, and tending our small garden patch. The aroma of corn muffins coming out of the oven is a memory I carry to this day. And whenever I make them here at home, it feels like I travel back in time. The school was miles away. We had to cross the creek and walk a good bit more to get there. On days with heavy rain, when the creek swelled up, you couldn't even go. Back then, I missed more days than I attended, but my mother, who had only studied up to the 2nd grade, insisted that I learn to read. Education is the one thing nobody can take away from you, she'd say, while lighting the kerosene lamp to teach me the letters after the sun went down. It was a tough life, but we didn't notice it. Everyone around lived the same way. On weekends, people would gather at the town square to talk, exchange news, and sometimes listen to some good old blues or gospel when there was a community celebration. The community church and Pastor Johnson were the center of everything, and he knew everyone by name. When the news arrived that the main rail line would pass through Clayton, it was a huge uproar. Some thought it was good. Others feared the town would lose its peace. My father worried, thinking he would lose his hauling job, and he was right. As soon as the tracks were laid and the trains started passing through, the hauling business dwindled. It was around that time I had my first contact with the trains. I must have been a boy of about 14, and I'd spend hours watching that enormous machine, spitting smoke and making noise. The railroad men looked important in their uniforms and pocket watches. Right then and there, I decided I wanted to be a part of it. The first job I got was as a helper at the depot, loading passengers' suitcases and parcels. I was paid next to nothing, but I felt like the most important man in the world when I wore the vest with the railroad company's emblem. I worked from sunup to sundown and came home with hands full of calluses, but my heart full of pride. It was while working at the depot that I met Old Man Gus, a telegraph operator who could read the messages by the clatter of the keys without even needing to look at the paper. He took me under his wing as an apprentice and started teaching me the secrets of the telegraph. "A smart young man like you can go far in the railroad," he'd say while I memorized the Morse code. In time, I climbed the ranks. I moved to the control cabin, where we organized the arrival and departure of trains. It was a job with a lot of responsibility. One mistake could cause a serious accident. I learned the importance of punctuality and attention to detail, things I carry with me to this day. The town also changed with the railroad. Electricity arrived, then the radio. News from the outside world started coming in faster. The Sunday market gained products we hadn't even known existed, and more people arrived, outsiders with different customs and ways of speaking. It was during one of these shifts that Clayton experienced its greatest tragedy, a devastating flood that nobody expected, which washed away half the houses near the creek. I lost my father in that flood. He tried to save a family living further down the creek and ended up being swept away by the current. It was a hard blow, but life in the country doesn't give you time to grieve for long. Soon I had to take on the role of man of the house, caring for my mother and my 2 younger sisters. The railroad was my salvation during that difficult time. The hard work helped me keep going, and the salary, though not much, was enough to keep food on the table. And it was also by the rails that my life took a new direction, because that's where I met Eleanor, the woman who would become my wife for so many years. But that's another story for the next chapter of this life, which has more curves than the train tracks crossing the Appalachian foothills. Eleanor came into my life like a train suddenly pulling into the station. I was on duty one hot August afternoon when the train coming from Atlanta was delayed due to a problem on the line. Among the restless passengers waiting was Ellie, sitting in a corner with a light blue dress and a book in her hands. It wasn't common to see young women reading around here back then. Most barely knew how to sign their name, but she was sitting there, concentrated on the pages, as if the world around her had vanished. When I went to notify people about the delay, she looked up at me and smiled in a way that made my heart jump like a young calf. "Thanks for the heads up," she said with a soft voice that sounded like music. "At least it gives me time to finish the chapter." I found out that Eleanor had come from Montgomery, Alabama, to visit an ailing aunt. She was a teacher at a small school back there and carried herself like someone who knew things you couldn't even imagine. I was enchanted, but also intimidated. What would an educated city girl want with a simple railroad man like me? But destiny is like the train lines. It follows a path that's already laid out. Her aunt, Miss Josephine, lived close to the depot, and Eleanor started passing by there every day. Sometimes she would stop to talk, asking me about the trains, about what it was like to work controlling those enormous machines. I'd answer, full of pride, and she'd listen with an interest that seemed sincere. One afternoon, I gathered my courage and invited her for a coffee at Mr. Lou's store, which was across from the depot. To my surprise, she accepted. We talked for hours, and I discovered that behind that city girl appearance, Eleanor had a simple heart that valued the same things I did. It was the start of a courtship that had the whole town talking. Miss Josephine's educated niece and the railroad boy. On our free afternoons, we'd go for walks around the square, eat sweet potato pie with coffee at Mrs. Bessie's stand, or simply sit by the creek to chat. Eleanor planned to return to Montgomery once her aunt recovered, but time passed, and she kept staying. She got a teaching position at the school here, and I was overjoyed. Between you and me, I think I convinced her to stay, because I knew all the train schedules. I knew exactly when the train back to Montgomery was scheduled to leave, and I had always invented an outing right at that hour, so she'd miss her trip. Back then, dating was serious business, monitored by parents and respected by the community. We always met with her aunt nearby or in public places where everyone could see us, but that didn't diminish what we felt for each other. On the contrary, every moment together was precious, and we made the most of it. I remember a special day at the church's annual festival. Eleanor looked beautiful in a gingham dress with ribbons in her hair. We danced under the colored banners with the bonfire crackling and the smell of sweet cakes and fruit punch in the air. It was that night that I proposed to her under a starry sky that seemed to have been decorated just for us. She said, "Yes, but on one condition. I want a house with big windows so I can see the world outside." Eleanor was always like that, a dreamer, wanting to see beyond what the eyes could see. I promised her I would build the most beautiful house Clayton had ever seen, with windows in every room. The wedding was simple, like everything in our life, but full of joy and hope. The community church filled up, and even Pastor Johnson got emotional during the blessing. The reception was in her aunt's yard, with enough food to feed the entire town. Barbecue, fried chicken, corn muffins, cakes of all kinds that the community women helped prepare. We started our married life in a rented little house near the depot. It wasn't the house of her dreams, but it was our corner. Eleanor decorated it with curtains she sewed herself and planted flowers in the small yard. On weekends, we started building our own home, brick by brick, with the help of friends and relatives. They were hard but happy times. I worked on the railroad during the day and on our house in my free hours. Eleanor taught classes, and still found time to help, carrying water and serving coffee to the workers. At night, exhausted, we would sit on the borrowed porch and plan the future, counting the stars and dreaming of the children that would come. But not everything is roses in the garden of life. Shortly after moving into the new house, the one with the big windows I promised her, Eleanor started acting strangely. Sometimes I'd come home from work and find her staring out the living room window with a distant look, as if searching for something she had lost. When I asked her what was wrong, she'd smile and say it was nothing, just tiredness. I didn't doubt her, because trust is the foundation of any love. But there was something in her eyes, a sadness that wasn't there before, as if she were carrying a secret too heavy to bear alone. It was around that time we discovered Eleanor couldn't have children. It was a hard blow, especially for her, who dreamed of filling the house with kids. She became depressed for a while. She cried in secret when she thought I wasn't looking. I tried to console her as best I could, telling her the important thing was having each other, that we could be happy just the same. Slowly, she recovered, smiling again, but something had changed between us, as if a door had closed, and we didn't have the key to open it again. That's when Eleanor suggested we adopt a child. And so, years later, Rhonda came into our lives, the mother of my grandson, James. But before that happened, before Rhonda arrived, there was a dark period in our life, a time I would prefer to forget, but which I now need to tell you so you understand what came next. Rhonda's arrival in our lives was like the sun after a storm. She was only a few months old when we brought her home, a tiny baby with bright eyes that seemed to see right into your soul. She had been left at the church door, and Pastor Johnson, knowing our situation, came to find us. God closes one door and opens a window, he said, not knowing that phrase would one day have a bitter meaning for me. Eleanor was reborn with motherhood. She started singing again while washing clothes at the tub, making corn muffins on the weekends, telling stories to the children at school, with that special twinkle in her eye. Our house gained new life, filled with the sounds of crying, laughter, and the lullabies she made up. Life continued its course for many years. I stayed at the railroad, where I had already become the station chief, a respected position in town. Eleanor divided her time between the school and caring for Rhonda, who grew up smart and curious like her mother. In the evenings, we would sit on the porch and have a fresh cup of coffee while Rhonda played in the yard and the sun set behind the foothills. Our simple house improved over time. I managed to buy a radio where we listened to gospel music and blues shows. Eleanor loved listening to the singers, especially Mahalia Jackson, who sang about life in a way that reminded her of when she was a little girl. When Rhonda turned 6, we threw a beautiful party in the yard. People came from all over, and we even built a small bonfire since it was close to the 4th of July. The children played jump rope and tag, while the adults talked and ate the cakes that Eleanor and the other women prepared. It was one of the happiest days of our lives. The years passed, and Rhonda grew up. She inherited Eleanor's intelligence and my stubbornness. She wanted to study, to go beyond what the small Clayton school could offer. It felt like tearing out a piece of my heart when she decided to move to Atlanta for college. But we understood it was the best thing for her. With the house emptier, Eleanor and I drew closer again. It was like going back to the beginning of our marriage, only now with more gray hair and more stories to tell. On hot nights, we would sit on the porch and gaze at the stars, talking about the future, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence that only couples who know each other well can share. It was during that time that I retired from the railroad. 40 years of service, an entire life dedicated to the rails and the schedules. The farewell was emotional, complete with an honor plaque and everything. My colleagues threw a surprise party, and I confess, I cried when the train whistle blew just for me. Retirement brought more free time, which I started dedicating to the garden and the chickens in the yard. I planted a little bit of everything: lettuce, cabbage, carrots, beets, and, of course, hot peppers, which no self-respecting Southern man can be without on his table. Eleanor made preserves with what I harvested and always had a jar of pepper jelly or peach jam to give to the neighbors. With retirement, I also started making wooden toys. First, they were simple cars for the neighbors' children. Then, with practice, I moved on to hobby horses, dolls, birdhouses. It was therapy for me, a way to keep my hands busy and my mind peaceful. Rhonda gave us the greatest joy when she announced she was pregnant. Eleanor prepared the layette with so much affection that she seemed to be the child's mother herself. She made little shirts, wool booties, colorful blankets, and when James was born, our house became a pilgrimage spot, with people coming to meet the baby and bring gifts. James grew up coming to spend his vacations with us in Clayton. He loved running through the fields, climbing trees, playing in the creek. It was like seeing a piece of heaven running around the yard. Eleanor spoiled his every whim, preparing the sweets he liked most, telling him stories before bed, and I made him increasingly elaborate special toys. Life continued serenely, like those clear sky days we have here in the foothills. I had gotten used to the quiet routine, the slower rhythm of the days. Eleanor continued teaching, even though she could retire. She said teaching was her life's mission, that she wouldn't know how to live without seeing the children's eyes sparkle when they learned something new. Our house was known in the neighborhood as a place of peace. People would come for advice, to exchange recipes, or just to chat for a bit. On weekends, we hosted visitors for long meals sprinkled with genuine laughter. We were respected as a couple who had beaten time and stayed together. At least, that's what everyone thought. And what I believed, too, until that Sunday afternoon, when my grandson James asked that innocent question that would change everything. Because, as the old folks here in Alabama say, there's no secret that time won't reveal. And ours was about to surface like spring water finding its way to the top. And that's how the most painful chapter of my life began. A time that tested not just my love, but also my strength and my faith. A time that made me question everything I thought was true. After that conversation with James, I spent an entirety chewing on those words. I tried to convince myself that it was just a child's imagination, that Eleanor would never do something like that after so many years together. But doubts are like termites. Once they get in, they keep eating away until nothing is left. That night, I pretended to go to sleep early. Eleanor was in the living room, knitting a scarf for the approaching winter. The radio played softly with a blues song about love and betrayal, an irony I only realized later. I closed my eyes but kept my ears alert, just like in the days when I needed to hear the distant sound of the trains. It was past 2 in the morning when I heard the floorboards creak. Even with her age, Eleanor still moved like a light, silent child. I opened my eyes just a little and saw her leaving the room, dressed in a simple nightgown and a shawl over her shoulders. I waited a few minutes and got up slowly, careful not to make a sound. I followed the dark hallway, guided only by the faint moonlight coming through the window cracks. The house I built, with so much love, now felt like a labyrinth full of shadows and secrets. I stopped before the living room and peeked through the slightly open door. Eleanor was at the kitchen window, the one that faced the backyard where I kept my garden. The window was open, and she was leaning out like someone waiting for another person. The moonlight illuminated her face, showing a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. I stood there paralyzed, barely breathing, afraid of making any noise that would give away my presence. That's when I heard a man's voice, low and husky, coming from outside. "I thought you weren't coming tonight, my flower." My flower. It was exactly what James had said. It wasn't a child's imagination. It was real as the pain that started gripping my chest right then. "I always come," Eleanor replied, with a voice I barely recognized, so full of tenderness and intimacy. "I just need to wait until he's sound asleep." Me, her husband, her partner of decades, reduced to an obstacle, an inconvenience in her life. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth, like I'd bitten into sour fruit. "It gets harder every day to come all the way out here," the man's voice continued. "People in town are already talking." "Nobody suspects a thing," Eleanor said, with a confidence that cut me like a knife. "He trusts me too much to suspect anything." That sentence was like a slap across the face. My trust, which I always considered a virtue, a proof of my love, was now being used against me like a weapon. It was my Achilles' heel, my weakness, which they exploited mercilessly. I stayed hidden there, listening to the conversation for a few more minutes. I couldn't see the man, only his silhouette in the backyard shadows, but I could feel the intimacy between them, a connection that went beyond words. They talked about things from the past, moments I didn't know about, plans that didn't include me. "One day, we'll run away, Ellie," he said at one point. "Just like before." Before. That word hit me like a lightning bolt. What before was this? What had happened that I didn't know about? My mind started racing, re-examining memories, looking for clues I might have ignored over the years. I couldn't stand to listen anymore. I went back to the room with a heart heavy as lead. I lay down and stared at the ceiling until dawn. When Eleanor came back to bed, pretending she had just gone to the bathroom, I closed my eyes and faked sleep. I didn't want to confront her yet. I needed to understand more, to find out who that man was and what that before meant. The next day, I acted as if nothing had happened. I woke up early as always, made coffee, and went to tend my garden. Eleanor seemed normal, maybe a little quieter than usual, but nothing that would raise suspicion. I watched her carefully, looking for signs, changes I might have missed. How could I have been so blind for so long? James was still staying with us, oblivious to the earthquake he had caused with his innocent words. He played in the yard, chasing the chickens and climbing the pecan trees. Eleanor treated him with the same affection as always, making the sweets he liked, telling him stories before bed. From the outside, we were the perfect picture of a happy family. But inside, I was crumbling. I started losing my appetite. Sleep fled from me like a startled animal. At night, I pretended to sleep and counted the hours until Eleanor got up and went to that window. I didn't have the courage to follow her again. My heart couldn't handle listening to any more of those conversations. Instead, I started to investigate. I went through old drawers, keepsake boxes, photo albums. I looked for any clue, any hint that would lead me to that before mentioned by the mysterious man. Eleanor noticed my restlessness, but attributed it to the excessive heat of those days, or the high blood pressure that sometimes bothered me. It was one afternoon, when Eleanor had gone to teach, and James was playing at a neighbor's house, that I found something. At the bottom of an old trunk, under winter clothes we hadn't used in years, was a small wooden box, the kind used to store jewelry or letters. I had never seen that box before. With trembling hands and a racing heart, I opened the box. Inside, I found several letters yellowed by time, some old photographs, and a flower brooch I had never given Eleanor. I picked up one of the photos. It showed a young Eleanor, before our marriage, next to a man I didn't know. They were hugging, smiling, with the sunset in the background. I flipped the photo over and read the handwritten inscription, "Forever yours, even if separated by fate." The handwriting wasn't Eleanor's. It had to be the man in the photo. The initial A hammered in my head. Who could this man be? And why was Eleanor keeping this photo hidden all these years? The letters told a story I never knew. They spoke of a young love, interrupted when Eleanor's father separated them. The man, whose name was Andrew, was forced to leave Montgomery and go far away. They promised to wait for each other, but time and distance eventually separated them, or at least that's what I thought had happened. The most recent letter was no more than a few months old. In it, Andrew said he had returned to the region after years working in Atlanta. He was a widower and had accidentally discovered that Eleanor lived in Clayton. He said he had never stopped loving her and wanted to see her one last time before moving on to New Orleans, where he had relatives. Everything started to make sense in a painful way. The man at the window was Andrew, the love from the past who had returned, and it seemed the feeling between them had never completely died, only dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. In that moment, sitting on the floor of the room with the evidence of betrayal scattered around me, I felt my world collapse. 40 years of marriage, an entire life built brick by brick, threatened by a ghost from the past who had returned to torment the present. I put everything back in its place, exactly as I found it. I wanted to observe more and understand better before confronting Eleanor. It was like one of those investigations you'd see in the detective movies playing at the town's cinema. In the following days, I started paying closer attention to everything. Eleanor's trips to the market, which took longer than normal. The times she said she was going to visit a sick friend and came back with a different sparkle in her eye. The phone calls she received where she spoke softly, almost whispering. They were all signs that had always been there, but which I, blinded by trust and love, had never noticed. One night, when James was already asleep and Eleanor was knitting in the living room, I gathered my courage and asked, as if I didn't care, "Eleanor, have you heard anything about an Andrew Vance from Montgomery?" I saw her face turn pale, her hands stopping mid-movement with the knitting needles. It was only for a second, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. "Andrew? I don't recall any Andrew," she replied, returning to her knitting as if nothing had happened. "Why do you ask?" "Nothing," I said, feigning disinterest. "I just ran into Charles down at the store today, and he mentioned an Andrew Vance from Montgomery was asking around town for you." It was a lie, of course, a lure to see how she'd react. And the reaction came, even as she tried to hide it. A tremor in her hands, a quick glance toward the kitchen window, as if she feared seeing someone there. "It must be a mistake," she said with forced calm. "It's been so long since I left Montgomery. Who would remember me from back there?" I didn't press it. I had seen what I needed to see. The lie was written on her face like an open book. My heart tightened even more, but I maintained my composure. It wasn't the time to explode, to show what I knew. I needed more. I needed to understand how deep this betrayal went. I started losing sleep completely. I spent the nights wide awake, pretending to sleep while listening intently for any movement from her. Sometimes Eleanor would get up in the middle of the night, and I knew she was going to that window to meet him. In those moments, I'd close my eyes tightly and bite my pillow not to scream in pain. During the day, the routine continued as if nothing were wrong. I tended the garden, played dominoes with friends in the square, took James fishing in the creek. But it was as if I was living another man's life, as if the real Franklin had been trapped that night in the dark hallway, listening to words he should never have heard. People started noticing my change. I lost weight. My eyes were sunken. My smile became rare. Mrs. Bessie, who sold vegetables at the market, even asked if I was sick. Pastor Johnson called me after the service to ask if everything was all right at home. I always replied that it was just tiredness, that it would pass soon. James noticed too. One afternoon, while I was trying to teach him how to make a slingshot from a pecan branch, he stopped and looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see into my soul. "Grandpa, why are you sad?" The question caught me by surprise, as only children's questions do. I swallowed and tried to smile, ruffling his hair. "I'm not sad, son. Grandpa's just thinking about some things." "Is it because of the man who talks to Grandma at the window?" I felt a chill run down my spine. How did he know I had found out? Had he seen me that night? "What man, James?" "The one I told you about, who calls her my flower. You changed after I told you." Children, so innocent and so observant at the same time. I couldn't answer. I just hugged him tight, like someone clinging to a piece of wood in the middle of a river with strong currents. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of the Miran, of the doubt, of the betrayal, was crushing me. I needed to confront Eleanor. I needed to hear the truth from her mouth, no matter how painful it was. After dinner, when James was already in bed, I called her to talk on the porch. "Eleanor," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk about something important." She looked at me with those eyes I knew so well, but which now seemed to belong to a stranger. "What's wrong, Franklin? You've been very strange lately." I took a deep breath, gathering all the courage I had. "Who is the man who meets you at the kitchen window in the middle of the night?" The world seemed to stop at that instant. Eleanor went pale as a sheet, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it, to invent some excuse. But then she lowered her eyes, like someone surrendering after a long battle. "How did you find out?" she asked, with a voice so low I barely heard her. "James saw you, and then I saw you myself. I heard everything. Eleanor, everything." A tear ran down her face, leaving a shining trail under the weak light of the porch. They weren't tears of remorse, I realized. They were tears from someone finally discovered, after carrying a secret for too long. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said, still not looking me in the eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Who is he, Eleanor?" "It's Andrew from the letters, isn't it? The man in the photo." She looked up, surprised that I knew so many details. "You went through my things?" "I needed to understand what was happening in my own house," I replied, feeling the anger rise. 40 years of marriage, Eleanor. 40 years. And you're deceiving me with a ghost from the past. "It's not like that, Franklin," she tried to explain, her voice choked. "It's complicated." "Then explain it to me," I demanded, trying to control my tone so as not to wake James. "Explain to me what it's like to cheat on your husband in your own house, at the window he built with his own hands." And that's how the revelation of a secret that would change our lives forever began. "Andrew was my first love," Eleanor began, her eyes lost in memories. "We met in Montgomery before I came to Clayton. He worked with my father at the hardware store. She took a deep breath, like someone preparing to dive into deep water. I remained silent, wanting to hear the whole story, no matter how much every word felt like a needle in my heart. We fell madly in love. It was the kind of love you read about in books, Franklin. Intense. Overwhelming. We planned to run away together, go to Atlanta, start a life far away from there. And why didn't you go? I asked, with the most controlled voice I could manage. My father found out. He caught us saying goodbye the night before we planned to leave. He was furious. He threatened to report Andrew for theft if he didn't disappear from town. It was a lie, of course, but my father had influence, and Andrew would have ended up in jail. I knew Eleanor's father, a severe, authoritarian man. He had died before our marriage, but his reputation remained alive in the memory of those who knew him. Andrew left that very night. He promised to come back for me when he could, but the years passed, and I never heard from him again. My father intercepted the letters. I only found out later when he confessed it on his deathbed. Eleanor paused, wiping away a tear. Part of me wanted to comfort her out of habit for so many years of partnership, but the other part stayed firm, wounded, wanting to hear the rest of the story. When I met you, Franklin, I had already lost hope of ever seeing Andrew again. You were so gentle, so determined. You offered me a different love, calmer, safer. I accepted, thinking I could learn to love you as you deserved. That hurt more than anything, knowing I was accepted not out of love, but out of convenience, out of resignation. And did you learn? I asked, my throat dry. Yes, I learned, she replied, looking me in the eyes now. I loved you, Franklin. I love you even now. But, I thought bitterly, but it's a different kind of love. It's like I have two hearts inside me. One belongs to you, to the man who built this life with me, who was a father to Rhonda, who is a grandpa to James. The other never stopped belonging to Andrew. It's stored in a place I can't even reach myself. I stayed silent, digesting those words. Two hearts. How was that possible? For me, there had always been only one heart, and it belonged entirely to Eleanor. When did he reappear? I asked after a while. About 6 months ago, she replied, lowering her eyes again. He found out from an acquaintance in Montgomery that we were living here. He was widowed. He had lost his wife to cancer. I came to Clayton to see you just one time, he said, to close a chapter before moving on to New Orleans, where he has family. But it wasn't just once, was it? My voice came out more bitter than I intended. No, she confessed. We met that day. We talked a lot. He told me he had also married, forced by circumstances, that he had children, a regular life, but that he had never completely forgotten me. And you never forgot him either, I concluded. Not as I should have, she admitted. When I saw him again, something woke up inside me, something I had managed to keep dormant all these years. And you started meeting at the window, I said, now understanding the scene I had witnessed. Yes, he comes almost every night. He's staying at Miss Josephine's boarding house at the edge of town. We talk for hours. We reminisce about the past. We talk about how our lives might have been different. You only talk? The question I didn't want to ask, but needed to know. Eleanor hesitated for an instant, and my heart dropped. Yes, we only talk, she finally said. He never came into this house, Franklin. I wouldn't do that to you. I wanted to believe her. Desperately, I wanted to believe her. But trust, once broken, is like a glass vase. Even repaired, it always shows the cracks. And that story about running away, just like before, I heard him say it. Eleanor sighed deeply. It's a dream, a fantasy. We talk about it sometimes. What it would have been like if we had managed to escape that first time. what it would be like if we ran away now. But they're just words, Franklin. I never really planned to leave you. But you thought about it, I insisted. You thought about going with him. I did, she admitted, and her honesty disarmed me for a moment. I thought about it in the crazy moments of the night, when the past feels more alive than the present. But then I'd look at our house. I'd think about Rhonda, about James, about you, and the madness would pass. We stayed in silence for a while. Only the sound of the crickets and the wind in the pecan tree leaves filled the night. I tried to organize my thoughts, to understand what I was feeling. It was a mix of anger, sadness, disappointment, and something else I couldn't name. And now what? I finally asked. What happens now, Eleanor? She looked at me, her eyes full of contained tears. I don't know, Franklin. For the first time in my life, I don't know what to do. Part of me wants Andrew to leave, for everything to go back to the way it was. Another part is afraid of losing him again. Of living the rest of my life asking myself, what if? And where do I fit into this story? Just the convenient husband, the plan B that worked when plan A failed? No, she exclaimed, taking my hands tightly. You are the man of my life, the father of my daughter, my partner for all these years. Never doubt that, Franklin. What I feel for Andrew is different. It's like a wound that never completely healed. A wound? He's reopening now, I said bitterly. Yes, she agreed, lowering her head. And I don't know how to close it again. I stood up from the chair. I needed to move, to breathe, to put some distance between us. I walked to the edge of the porch and stood looking at the starry sky, so vast and indifferent to our small human dramas. I want him to leave, I finally said, turning to face her. I want those conversations at the window to stop. I can't force you to forget him, Eleanor, but I can ask you to choose. Is it him, or is it me? Eleanor seemed to shrink into her chair, as if my words had physical weight. It's not that simple, Franklin. Yes, it is, I cut in, feeling the anger rise again. It is exactly that simple. Either you end this now, or I leave. I won't live dividing my wife with a ghost from the past. You would leave me after all these years? She asked, incredulously. You already left me, Eleanor, I replied, feeling the weight of that truth. Maybe not physically, but your heart isn't completely here anymore, and I don't know if I can live like that. She started crying for real then, sobbing like a lost child. For a moment, I almost gave in to the impulse to comfort her, to tell her we would find a solution together, as we always had. But something inside me had changed that night. A line had been crossed, and there was no way to go back. I need time, she said through sobs. I need to think, to organize my feelings. Time is what we no longer have, Eleanor, I replied, suddenly feeling exhausted. We already spent 40 years, and look where we ended up. I turned and walked into the house, leaving her alone on the porch with her tears and her decisions. That night, I slept in the guest room. Or rather, I tried to sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, going over our entire life together, looking for signs I might have missed, moments when she might have revealed that her heart was never completely mine. The next morning, a heavy silence hung over the house. James sensed something was wrong, but he was too young to understand what. I made coffee as usual, but I couldn't eat anything. Eleanor barely touched her food either, her eyes swollen from spending the night awake. What's wrong, Grandma? Are you sick? James asked, noticing her red eyes. It's just a little headache, sweetie, she replied, forcing a smile. It'll pass. If only it were that simple. I thought. If only heartaches could pass with a pill and a glass of water. During the day, we avoided being alone. I busied myself in the garden. She went to school to teach. James stayed with me, helping to water the plants, chasing the chickens, asking questions about everything, as children do. It was a balm to have him near, a reminder that life continues, that there is innocence and joy, even in the darkest moments. When night came, after putting James to bed, I found Eleanor in the kitchen. She was standing in front of that window, looking outside, as if she expected to see someone in the backyard shadows. "He won't come tonight," she said, without turning around. I sent a message through Miss Josephine asking him not to come anymore. I felt a mixture of relief and surprise. I hadn't expected such a quick decision. And he accepted, just like that? Eleanor turned then, and I saw she was crying again. I don't know if he accepted. I just know I made my choice, Franklin. And my choice is you. It's our family. It's this life we built together. I wanted to believe her. With all my strength, I wanted to believe her. But something inside me was broken. And the trust that was once as natural as breathing now felt like a conscious effort. How can I know it's true? How can I trust you again, Eleanor? She walked closer, taking my hands in hers. You can't. Not right away, she replied with a surprising honesty. Trust will have to be rebuilt day by day. All I can promise you is that I will try with all my strength to be worthy of it again. That night, I allowed her to hold me in bed, but I couldn't sleep well. Part of me wanted to believe everything would return to normal, that the nightmare was over. Another part knew that nothing would ever be the same, that something precious had been lost between us. In the days that followed, we tried to maintain an appearance of normalcy, mainly for James. Eleanor seemed determined to rebuild our relationship, more attentive, more present than she had been in recent months. I tried to reciprocate, but it was as if an invisible wall, made of the fragments of our broken trust, stood between us. At night, I still woke up occasionally, checking if she was in bed beside me. And when she wasn't, panic consumed me until I found her in the kitchen, drinking water or making tea for the insomnia that also plagued her. A week passed like this, in a fragile balance between what we were and what we had become, until the morning I found an envelope under the front door. My name was handwritten on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. With a racing heart, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with only a few lines written. Mr. Franklin Ellison, we don't know each other personally, but I know who you are. I am Andrew Vance, the man who has been meeting your wife Eleanor these last few weeks. I am writing to inform you that I am leaving for New Orleans today, as was my original plan. Eleanor chose to stay with you, and I respect her decision. She deserves to be happy, and if her happiness is by your side, then that is where she should remain. I apologize for the disruption I caused in your family. It was not my intention to create problems. I only wanted to see a face one last time that I have carried in my heart for so many years. With respect, Andrew. I stood in the hallway, rereading the letter several times, the envelope fallen to the floor. It was a goodbye, a closure. I should have felt relieved, victorious even. But what I felt was a strange emptiness, a sense that a story bigger than mine had been abruptly interrupted. Eleanor found me still holding the letter. She saw the name of the sender and turned pale. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice almost failing. I handed her the paper without saying anything. I watched as she read. I saw innocence pass over her face, like clouds on a windy day. Surprise, sadness, resignation, and finally, a calm that seemed to come from a long distance. "He left then," she said, folding the letter carefully. "Yes," I replied, still trying to understand my own feelings. "He left, as you asked." "As we asked," she corrected, giving the letter back to me. "It's for the best." "Is it?" I asked, unable to hide the doubt in my voice. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words. "I don't know, Franklin. I don't know if it's for the best or just the least painful. I just know that I chose our life together, with all its ups and downs, over a fantasy from the past, and I hope I never regret that choice." Those words stayed with me for the rest of the day. I hope I never regret that choice. It wasn't a certainty, it was a hope. And I wondered if I could live with that, with the constant doubt of whether she really wanted to be with me, or if she was just afraid of the alternative. That night, as Eleanor slept beside me, I made a decision that would change the course of our lives forever. I decided that I couldn't live like this anymore, with this doubt corroding my soul, like rust on a train rail. In the early morning, before Eleanor even woke up, I went for a walk around town. I needed to think, to breathe air that wasn't weighed down by the burden of our stories. I walked aimlessly, passing by the old rail depot where I had worked for so many years, by the church where we were married, by the school where Eleanor still taught. It was when I passed by Miss Josephine's boarding house that my steps faltered. That was where Andrew had been staying, or had been, since, according to his letter, he would have already left. Something compelled me to go in. Perhaps the need to confirm that he was truly gone, that this part of our story was closed. The boarding house was an old two-story building with a wide front porch where some guests were having coffee. Miss Josephine, a plump, talkative lady who knew everyone in Clayton, greeted me with a surprised smile. "Mr. Ellison, what a surprise to see you here so early. Come join us for a cup of coffee." "No, Miss Josephine, thank you. I just stopped by to ask about one of your guests, an Andrew Vance from Montgomery. Has he left?" Her smile faltered for an instant, and I realized she knew more than she let on. "Oh, yes. Mr. Andrew left yesterday morning, bright and early. He took the first transport to Atlanta. Said he was going to New Orleans from there, to visit family. Yeah. Was he staying here long, I asked, trying to sound casual. "Almost 6 months," she replied, looking at me curiously. "Do you know him?" "Not personally," I replied, feeling a knot in my throat. "Just by name." Miss Josephine observed me for a moment, as if deciding whether to say anything more. Finally, she lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, Mr. Ellison, he was a very private man. He went out every night, came back late. Sometimes I'd wake up with the sound of him coming in, but he was a good payer, never caused any trouble." "Did he talk about my wife? About Eleanor?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Miss Josephine's eyes widened in surprise. Then they filled with understanding. So you know." "Yes, he mentioned Miss Eleanor a few times, said they were old acquaintances from Montgomery. But don't you worry, Mr. Ellison. I never heard anything improper. And yesterday, when he left, how was he?" "Sad, happy, resigned, I'd say," she replied after thinking for a bit. "Like someone closing a difficult chapter in their life. He left this letter for you, though. He asked me to give it to you if I saw you." She pulled an envelope from her apron pocket, identical to the one I had found at home. My heart leaped. Another letter. What else could Andrew have to say? I thanked Miss Josephine and quickly left there, feeling the weight of the envelope in my pocket as if it were lead. I found a bench in the town square under an old pecan tree and opened the letter with trembling hands. Mr. Ellison, if you are reading this letter, it is because you went to the boarding house to confirm my departure. I understand your distrust. In your place, I would do the same. Yes, I have left. By the time this letter reaches your hands, I will be far from Clayton. I want you to know that it was never my intention to destroy your marriage. I came to Clayton only to see Eleanor one last time, to understand if what I felt for her all these years was real, or just an illusion created by distance and what might have been. I discovered that it was real, more real than I wanted to admit. But I also discovered another truth. Eleanor loves you. Maybe not in the same way she loved me one day, but she loves you with a love built over decades, made of small moments, shared joys and sorrows, of an entire life together. It is a different love, perhaps stronger in many ways. She chose to stay with you, not out of fear or convenience, but because that is where her heart truly belongs now. I respect that choice, and I ask you to respect it too, by not doubting her or punishing her for the past. We all carry old loves inside us, Mr. Ellison. Some more alive than others, some more painful, but they are just ghosts, echoes of who we once were. What matters is who we choose to be today. And Eleanor chose to be your wife, the mother of your daughter, the grandmother of your grandson. I leave knowing that I did the right thing, even if it hurts. I only ask that you take good care of her, that you make her happy, as I couldn't. She deserves all the happiness in the world. With sincere respect, Andrew. When I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face, without my realizing it. Andrew's letter had touched me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the letter of a man trying to steal another man's wife, but of someone who, like me, loved Eleanor and wanted her happiness above all else. Sitting there under the shade of the pecan tree, with the sounds of the town waking up around me, I started to understand something important. Love is not a competition. It's not something you can win or lose. It's a daily choice, a commitment renewed every sunrise. And Eleanor had chosen to stay with me, to continue our story together, even when she had the opportunity to relive a love from the past. I put the letter in my pocket and walked home with lighter steps, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I found Eleanor in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She looked at me with concern, noticing my morning absence. "Where were you, Franklin?" I was worried. Instead of answering, I walked up to her and hugged her tightly. Smelling the familiar scent of her hair, the comforting solidity of her body against mine. Eleanor was surprised for a moment, then relaxed into the embrace, as if she understood everything, without needing words. "Is everything all right?" she murmured against my hair. "Everything's going to be all right now." And for the first time in days, I truly believed it. It wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would be moments of doubt, fear, and insecurity. Broken trust would need time and care to be restored. But we were willing to try, to rebuild what we had, brick by brick, just as I had built our house so many years ago. That afternoon, I took a hammer and nails and went to the kitchen window, the very window that had been the scene of the nightly meetings. Eleanor watched me with curiosity as I measured, cut, and nailed a beautiful, carved wooden frame around it. "What are you doing, Franklin?" she asked, intrigued. "Transforming it," I replied simply. "This window has a lot of history. Instead of destroying it or ignoring it, we're going to transform it into something new, something ours." Eleanor understood the symbolism of the gesture. With tears in her eyes, she grabbed a brush and helped me paint the frame sky blue, the color of the Alabama summer sky, the color of the dress she wore when I first saw her at the depot. James found us like that, painting together, laughing at the paint splatters that dotted our clothes and faces. He wanted to participate, of course, and soon his little hands were covered in blue paint, leaving marks everywhere. "What are you doing, Grandpa?" he asked, ever curious. "We're turning a sad story into a happy story, son," I replied, ruffling his hairget with my clean hand. "That's what we do in life. We take the parts that hurt and turn them into something beautiful." He didn't fully understand, of course, but he smiled anyway, happy to see us happy again. That night, for the first time in a long time, the three of us ate dinner together at the kitchen table under the soft light that entered through the newly decorated window. Eleanor had prepared my favorite, fried chicken, and I had made a sweet potato pie for dessert. We talked, we laughed, we listened to the fantastic stories James made up, like a normal family, like the family we always were, and almost lost. Later, when James was asleep and we were lying in our bed, Eleanor turned to me in the dark and took my hand in hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on us, for understanding that the heart is complicated, that it sometimes carries more stories than it should, for giving me a second chance." "I'm not giving you a second chance, Eleanor," I replied, squeezing her hand. "I'm giving us one, because I made mistakes too. I also failed to notice what was happening, to understand what you needed." She leaned in and kissed me softly, a kiss that carried 40 years of history and the promise of a few more years ahead. "I love you, Franklin," she said with a sincerity I hadn't heard in a long time. "I always loved you, even when my heart was confused, and I will always love you until the end." "I love you too, Eleanor. Even with all the complications, even with all the ghosts from the past. I love you here and now, and that's what matters." And we fell asleep embracing. Just like in the first years of marriage, when the world seemed simpler and the future endless. I knew we still had difficult days ahead, that Andrew's shadow wouldn't completely disappear overnight. But for the first time since James asked that innocent question, I felt peace, because I finally understood that true love is not the kind that never wavers, never doubts or fears. True love is the kind that, even in the fiercest storms, finds a path back home. It's the one we choose every day, even when it would be easier to give up. It's the one that transforms windows of betrayal into portals of reconciliation, that sees beauty where others would only see pain. And so, we began writing a new chapter in our story, not erasing the past, but learning from it, growing through it, a chapter where we weren't just a couple of old folks in a small town in Alabama, but two survivors who had faced the worst crisis of their lives and emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. The months that followed were a time of rebuilding, like after those summer storms that leave roofs ripped off and fences knocked down. The house is still standing, but it needs care, repairs, attention to the cracks that were once overlooked. Eleanor and I developed a new routine. On nights when sleep eluded us, instead of sitting in silence, each chewing on our own thoughts, we would sit on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea and talk. Not just about our day or mundane things, but about feelings, fears, and hopes. Things that men of my generation were not taught to share. Sometimes I still think about him, Eleanor confessed one of those nights, when the moon was so full it lit up the yard like daytime. Not like before, not with that urgency, but like someone thinking about a song that marked a time in their life. In other times, that confession would have devastated me, fueled my jealousy and insecurities. But now, sitting there with her under the starry foothill sky, I felt only a calm acceptance. It was the truth, raw and simple, and I preferred the painful truth to the sweetest of lies. I understand, I replied, squeezing her hand. I can't ask you to erase the memories, only not to let them overshadow the present, what we built together. She smiled, that serene smile that always reminded me of the young teacher I met at the depot decades ago. That's what I'm doing, Franklin, day by day, and it's working. James returned to Atlanta after a few weeks with us. Rhonda came to pick him up on a Sunday after church. She noticed something different between us, a more attentive gaze, a more conscious gentleness. You two seem different, she commented, while we were having coffee in the kitchen, with James playing in the yard. More connected, somehow. Eleanor and I exchanged a knowing glance. We had decided not to tell anyone about what happened, not even our daughter. Some stories belong only to those who live them. It's age, Eleanor replied, winking at me. The older we get, the more we realize what truly matters. Rhonda smiled, satisfied with the answer. I'm glad. I always admired your marriage, you know? The way you overcame so many difficulties together, how you support each other. That's what I want for myself someday, too. Those words touched me deeply. Our daughter saw us as an example, a beacon of stability and lasting love. She didn't know how close we came to sinking, how much we were still learning to navigate together after the storm. With James gone, the house became quieter, emptier. It was as if a ray of sunshine had been turned off, taking with it the contagious joy that only children possess. But it also brought a new kind of intimacy for Eleanor and me, a space to continue our journey of reconnection without distractions. It was during that period that we decided to do something we had postponed for years, a trip together. It didn't need to be far or expensive, just a change of scenery, a time that was only ours. We chose a quiet spot in northern Alabama, famous for its springs, which are said to have healing powers. And perhaps that was what we needed, healing. The trip felt like a second honeymoon. We stayed in a simple but cozy inn near one of the resort towns. We spent hours in the warm waters, feeling our muscles relax and our worries dissolve into the steam that rose, forming clouds above us. At night, we dined in small local restaurants, trying typical Southern dishes and reminiscing about stories from our early years together. It was on one of those nights, after a particularly pleasant dinner accompanied by a local wine, that Eleanor asked me something I never expected to hear. Have you ever loved anyone else more than me, Franklin? The question caught me off guard, like a boxcar derailing on a smooth track. I thought about evading it, about saying she was the only love of my life. It would have been the easiest, safest thing to do, but we had promised each other honesty, and I wouldn't break that promise. There was a girl, I began, feeling my face warm with the memory. Before you. Her name was Tamara. She was the daughter of the store owner where I bought supplies for the depot. We met when I had just started at the railroad. I was still an inexperienced boy, full of dreams. Eleanor looked at me with genuine interest, without judgment or jealousy. This complete openness was new territory for us. What happened with you two? She asked, taking a sip of her wine. She moved to Atlanta, I replied, the memories returning with a surprising clarity. Her father sold the store and got a better job in the city, She wrote me a few letters for a while, then they stopped coming. Life went on. I met you, and the rest of the story you already know. Do you think about her sometimes? I did for many years, I admitted. Not with love or desire, but as a curiosity. What would have happened if she had stayed? What would my life have been like? But they were passing thoughts that became rarer over time until they practically disappeared. Eleanor smiled, a serene smile that lit up her eyes. That's how it will be with Andrew too, she said, stating a fact. It's already happening. The thoughts are getting rarer, the memories less vivid, until one day it will be just an old story, I tell myself sometimes, without pain, without urgency. I reached my hand across the table and touched hers, feeling the skin that time had marked with spots and wrinkles, but which to me was still the softest, the most cherished. I'm not in a hurry, I said sincerely. Take all the time you need. I'll be right here. We returned to Clayton feeling renewed, as if we had left behind in northern Alabama, not just physical fatigue, but also the ghosts that haunted us. The house seemed lighter, more welcoming, as if it too had been freed from some invisible weight. Eleanor returned to her classes with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in a long time. The students noticed the difference, commenting on how the teacher seemed happier, more present. I resumed my carpentry projects with renewed vigor, creating increasingly elaborate toys for James and the other neighborhood children. It was around that time that I started writing too. Nothing too ambitious, just a diary where I recorded my thoughts, youthful memories, stories from the railroad that I feared would be lost to time. Eleanor encouraged me. She said I had a way with words, that I should share my stories with more people. Who would want to hear the stories of a retired old railroad man? I'd ask, laughing at the idea. Many people, she'd reply with conviction. Your stories are part of the history of Clayton, of the development of this region. They are important, Franklin. Influenced by her enthusiasm, I started frequenting the square on Sunday afternoons, where the older men would gather to play dominoes and talk. I would bring my notebook, and between one game and the next, I would read a story I had written. To my surprise, they were always well received. The men would laugh, nod, sometimes adding details from their own experiences. You should put all of that into a book, Franklin, suggested Mr. Vance one day, the former mayor of the city, and respected by all. A book about the history of the railroad in Clayton, Alabama, told by someone who lived it. The idea seemed absurd at first, but it started to take shape in my head. Why not? I had time, knowledge, and now, thanks to my friends in the square, confidence. I mentioned it to Eleanor that night, expecting her to laugh at the idea, but she was thrilled. It's perfect for you, she exclaimed, already imagining the project. We can talk to the history teacher at the school. I'm sure he'd help organize the information, maybe even get some old photos of the depot. And so began a new chapter in my life, one I never imagined living. In my 70s, I, Franklin Ellison, former chief of the Clayton Rail Depot, was writing a book. Eleanor became my biggest cheerleader, proofreader, and critic. We spent hours at night at the kitchen table, me dictating stories, her taking notes and suggesting improvements. The book project united us in a way I never expected. It was something just ours, a joint creation that gave us a common purpose beyond daily routines and shared memories. Eleanor said she was rediscovering a Franklin she didn't fully know, a storyteller who had been dormant all those years. And I was rediscovering her too. I saw her sharp intelligence, her talent for organizing ideas, her infinite patience when I got lost in memories or repeated the same story several times. It was like a new courtship, with the difference that we already knew each other's habits. We had already built an entire life together, The months passed, and the manuscripts started taking shape. Professor Claudius from the school where Eleanor taught helped us with the structure and researched historical information to complement my memories. The local library provided old photographs of the depot and the first trains that passed through Clayton. The book was becoming something bigger than I had ever imagined. James came to visit us regularly and noticed the changes in our dynamic. "Grandpa and Grandma are always writing," he would comment to his mother. "It's a book of memories," Rhonda explained, having become an enthusiast of the project. "Grandpa is telling what life was like here before, when trains were the main form of transport." James, with his natural curiosity, became interested in the project. He also sat beside me while I wrote, asking to hear the most exciting stories, especially the ones involving accidents or dangerous situations on the tracks. "Tell it again, Grandpa, how you saved that boy who almost got hit by the train." And I would tell it, reliving the moment when, young and agile, I ran across the rails to pull an unsuspecting boy out of the path of an approaching train. Eleanor would listen too, even though she knew the story by heart, her eyes shining with pride. It was on one of those story afternoons, with James absorbed in the railroad adventures, that Eleanor surprised me with a question asked in a low voice just for me. "Have you ever wondered if Andrew really went to New Orleans?" The question dropped like a stone in a calm lake, spreading ripples of unease. No, I had never questioned it. I had accepted his letter as truth, as closure. The idea that he might still be around, perhaps waiting, had never occurred to me. "Why do you ask that?" I replied, keeping my voice low so James, entertained with a wooden car, wouldn't hear. "I don't know," she said, seeming genuinely confused by her own question. "It was just a thought that crossed my mind. Sometimes I wonder if he really moved on, or if he still thinks about us, about me." I felt a pang of jealousy, that old acquaintance that had been dormant for months. But I took a deep breath and pushed it away, choosing to trust. "I think he left, Eleanor." The letter seemed sincere. And even if he hasn't left, even if he's still somewhere thinking about you, what matters is where you are. And you're here with me, building something new. She smiled. That smile that lit up her entire face and made me remember why I had fallen in love with her. "Yes, I'm here," she confirmed, squeezing my hand. "And this is exactly where I want to be." That brief conversation could have reopened old wounds, but instead, it served to reaffirm our choice for each other, our decision to continue together despite the obstacles of the past. It was as if Eleanor needed to verbalize that final doubt, that last what if, in order to let it go completely. And that's what happened. We never brought up the subject again. Andrew gradually became an increasingly distant figure in our lives, a closed chapter in a story that continued to be written every day. The book was finally completed the following spring. Rails of Memory: The History of the Railroad in Clayton, Alabama, by Franklin Ellison. The City Council became interested in the publication, seeing it as a way to preserve local history. They did a small print run, distributed to schools and the city library. They even organized an autograph night at the community center, where former railroad colleagues, Eleanor's students, and local authorities attended. It was an unforgettable night. I, a simple man of humble origins who had barely finished elementary school, was there autographing a book with my stories. Eleanor, radiant with pride by my side, introduced me to everyone as her husband, the writer. James, who had come especially for the event, ran between the guests, announcing to everyone, "My grandpa wrote a real book." In the middle of the small celebration, while autographing a copy for Professor Claudius, I looked up and saw Eleanor across the room. She was talking animatedly with some of her teaching colleagues, gesturing with that energy that always characterized her. The blue dress she wore, chosen especially for the occasion, highlighted the natural elegance that not even time could diminish. And I had a revelation, one of those that appear suddenly, with the clarity of a lightning bolt, cutting the dark sky. It was her. It was always her, even with all the doubts, all the crises, all the Andrews that fate might place in our path. Eleanor was the love of my life, the partner I chose, and who chose me, day after day, year after year. In that moment, looking at her from afar, I understood that true love is not the kind you read about in novels, perfect and without friction. It's something deeper, more complex, made of daily choices, forgiveness, acceptance of each other's imperfections and your own. It is built over time, like a house, brick by brick, patiently, resisting storms and rising when necessary. Eleanor must have felt my gaze because she turned and smiled at me. That smile I knew so well, and which still made my heart race. I returned the smile, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. We were good. We had survived the worst crisis of our marriage and emerged from it stronger, more united, more aware of the value of what we had built together. The ghost of Andrew, who once threatened to destroy everything we loved, had become just that. A ghost, a distant memory that no longer held power over us. The kitchen window, once the scene of secret meetings, was now just a window, beautified by the frame we painted together. A symbol of our ability to transform pain into beauty. And so, slowly, we recovered not only our trust in each other, but also the joy of living together, of sharing the small moments of everyday life, of planning a future that, though not as long as the past, promised to be equally rich in experiences and discoveries. Today, when I look out the window of our kitchen, that same window that almost destroyed our marriage, I see much more than a piece of the yard where I cultivate my garden. I see a symbol of our journey, a reminder that true love is not the one that never faces storms, but the one that chooses to remain steady, even when the winds blow too hard. James is 10 now, and when he comes to visit us, he always asks to hear stories. He usually wants the ones about the railroad, about the giant locomotives crossing the foothills. But sometimes, I find myself wanting to tell another story. The one about an old couple who almost lost each other, but found their way back to one another. Maybe one day, when he's older, I'll tell him, or maybe not. Some stories are like treasures kept in the heart forever. Eleanor continues teaching, even though she could retire. She says teaching keeps her mind young. And I continue making my wooden toys, tending the garden, telling stories to anyone who wants to listen. My book about the railroad received a second edition with more photos and stories from other retired rail workers, a small local fame I never sought but which fills me with pride. As for Andrew, we never heard from him again. Sometimes I wonder if he really went to New Orleans, if he found peace, if he still thinks about Eleanor. But those thoughts no longer bring pain or jealousy, just a calm understanding that we all carry unfinished stories inside us. The important thing is what stories we choose to keep writing. If I learned anything from all this, it's that love is not perfect or constant. It wavers, trembles, sometimes almost fades. But if it's true, it finds the strength to reignite, to shine even brighter after the darkness. That's what happened to us. The love we had before was like a comforting, constant ember. The one we have now is like a flame that almost went out, but was rekindled with care and attention. burning with an intensity only known by those who came close to losing everything. So, when my little grandson asks me why Grandma was talking to a man at the window in the middle of the night, I smile and just say, he was an old friend who needed to say goodbye, son. And that goodbye taught us the value of what truly matters. Being here now with the one we truly love. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one. With love.